Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us here at the October session of the Southern Fried DNN user group. We moved dates from later in the month. We're normally on the third Thursday of every month, and that's still our schedule. But from a scheduling conflict, we moved forward here to today, and so we're glad for everybody can join us here in person and as well online. And we will be posting video and recording of this online, so that we're hoping more people can catch us afterwards if they weren't specifically able to join us tonight. It's October. We're heading towards the end of the year, and we have a lot of exciting things that are not only going on in the community, but also building to what's going on here in January 2017 for our DNN Summit. So the very first couple things we're going to talk about is a little bit of community buzz. We're going to get some information from DNN Summit, and then we're going to move into our session for the evening and getting to hear some wise words, tips, and suggestions from the fantastic Will Strohl, who's going to be talking about evaluating extensions and really keeping your site clean. And so that's always something that is worth a fresh look, even on sites that are older and have not changed that much. It's always a good idea to take a look through, and we're going to hear some good information from Will. So to begin with community buzz, I believe there are several notes and updates here from David that he's going to bring in. See if I can get the screen here. Two, while we're bringing up those screens, I did neglect to mention sponsors for the evening. We have JetBrains as our returning sponsor who's really been with us this year, and we have to thank them. I know there have been plenty of people who've been able to take advantage of some of the tools that we've been able to give away as prizes, and I believe we have another one here today, or we do not have one today? All right, we have another one left. We will be doing a prize for that at the end, especially for the people who are online. Make sure to stay online. At this point, some of the regulars have won those previously, so it may be that just by the nature of being online and with us, you get a better chance. So we have, of course, JetBrains that I mentioned, but we have Microsoft as well. Michael Mushat here is our resident Microsoft employee, and he lets us into this fantastic location, and we love being here and having him join us, so I always have to say thank you. All right. David, community buzz.
Yeah, so there's a little bit going on in the community, and I thought we'd highlight a few of those tonight. Hopefully you guys can hear okay. If not, please speak now. Let me know.
Or forever hold your peace.
Yeah, forever hold that peace, whatever it is. Okay, so first on the list, we had wanted to mention that, let's see, last month I believe we had a presentation from Joe Brinkman about the DNN 9 announcement. It's good to note that now the nightly builds, you can get to those on the DNN software website under Community, Downloads, Nightly Builds, and now you will start seeing the DNN 9 builds being dropped on a nightly basis there. So feel free to take a look at those and start playing around with the wonderful persona bar that's coming. So I want to mention that one. Also wanted to put a mention out related to DNN 9 about intro videos that are being created by Addison Oliveira on the DNN Corp YouTube channel. So if you were to go to YouTube, search on DNN Corp, and off of their home, click on playlist, and under here there's a DNN 9 playlist. You'll see that I think on a daily basis they're dropping these short, I think 5-minute or less intro videos. So nice thing there to get a little bit of insight as to what's coming next. Wanted to put out a mention for, and this is just kind of off my personal experience over the past couple of weeks, of having to, on a couple of client sites, quickly configure some DNN URL redirects. And there's multiple ways to do that, everything from doing it right in IIS to purchasing modules to do that or wherever. I ran across a nice open source module that was created by Jay Mathis that is DNN URL management, or X3 DNN URL management. This was on CodePlex before, but now it has been moved over to GitHub. So feel free to check this out, but it's a great little module that just exposes some features that are already in DNN but just not exposed through the UI.
If you're familiar with the past history with the DNN URL rewriter, you'll know that the external DNN URL rewriter was brought into DNN Core, and those elements and items are part of the data structure, but the management that used to be there from the DNN URL rewriter from the external modules wasn't present in module form inside the site. You had to edit things in the web config or edit them in the database. And what X3 here did was put them into handy modules that are very, very similar to what you used to do. So the host level portal, host level URL settings, and then the portal level URL settings are all there. So if you're familiar with managing it before, you'll be very familiar with it in this set of modules. And one of my favorite surprise meets at the last DNN Con Baltimore was in the hallway, and I suddenly caught a tag, and I said, "Wait, you're X3. Thank you so much for that excellent module." So fun to run into folks.
Yeah, it's a good little module. So, you know, one of the things I think we've noticed so far, we had one site where we were putting in almost 500 redirects, and unfortunately that has to be done manually, one by one in this. So there's lots of opportunity for UX improvement on that. Now that it's on GitHub, feel free to chime in there and contribute to the project. Wanted to mention also one interesting thing I saw where I know a lot of you probably utilize the DNN Go themes, and some of you may have run into Open Content, which is another open source project for structured content out there that I think Sacha, I can't remember his last name right now off the top of my head. They just released this week a open content template pack for a DNN Go theme. Did not get much time to play with that, but it seemed like an interesting concept of a very quick way to spin up an entire site using their templates and so forth. So I thought that was interesting and worthy of mentioning. But essentially, I think it gives you the capability of editing the short codes and things like that that happen to be in the DNN Go themes, which is based off of Bootstrap. So some nice little help there. Wanted to give a shout out to a community member and a company within the community, and I'll see if I can find the link here real quick. Jeff McWhirter and Gravity Works Design. This past week they announced that they were on the Inc. 5000 list, and what a big accomplishment that has happened there. And I think it's right here on their site. Very excited about that. Yep, there we go. Gravity Works makes Inc. 5000 list, so kudos to them. Congratulations to them. Great achievement on their end. The next thing I wanted to bring up was that DNN Connect has announced their 2017 event that is going to be in the same location as it was last year in Girona, Spain. So be sure to check out. I'm sure there'll be more details to come there. Great time to expect. And I think that's a good segue maybe into updates on DNN Summit. And I'll turn that back over to you if you don't mind. Update there.
Yeah, so for DNN Summit, if you are not aware, DNN Summit is the U.S.-based community conference, formerly DNN Con, of which Will has started and got a lot of history. But most people know about DNN Summit, DNNSummit.org, conference being held in Denver in January 2017. If you have been kind of keeping along, we've updated the site a little bit. We've got a new kind of architecture here as far as the information architecture, so you'll see that. We have closed, or we've selected the speakers. We should be posting those to the site soon. Obviously, the people who were selected to speak have been notified. But as far as posting them on the site, we'll be doing that here shortly. We still have an open call for Ignite speakers. So if you do the quick, short 5-minute Ignite sessions, you can see those or the call there. And if you click on the speakers page, you should be able to see the end date for that is October the 28th for Ignite session. Also, so this is the page where you would register for the conference. If you click on the register page, you'll see where we've got the early bird pricing. So that is going to end here shortly, October 22nd. So you got a couple more days, week or so, as far as getting the early bird pricing. And so I think those are all the announcements that I know. We have some more blogs that will be coming about things like the Business Roundtable and just other items related to the conference. And also, if you are not following DNN Summit on Twitter, you should, because whoever they have running their Twitter account is just crazy.
A couple of things that I'd add in. We made the announcement last session that if you were waiting for hotel reservations, you should really get those in soon, faster, because they are running out of those convention rate block rooms fast. If they aren't all already run out. So if you're waiting for hotel rooms, don't. Go ahead and get started with that. Go ahead and register so you get your early bird and get those room rates.
You got to get that slopes thing. That's in between those.
Yeah. Actually, our own group of folks here, we've got our hotel reservations, but we got to get our ski slopes reservations going ourselves as a group. And then the second thing I was going to add in about DNN Summit was, oh, you mentioned, sorry, Ignite sessions and call for Ignite sessions. All right.
So that's all for Summit.
Now be sure to get involved and engage on Twitter side of things, and at minimum, please retweet for this and promote the event that's coming up.
All right. Well, unless there's any other items, we are ready to pass over to Will Strohl. Our kind of overview or information for this particular session is that we're getting into evaluating extensions. And Will's going to give us a guide on keeping your site clean. And we know that there's a lot of options out there for modules and elements that can be installed into your site. And he's going to talk a little bit about evaluating modules and what the module developers should be doing and how they should be doing things, and maybe how to look out for things and signs for modules that are doing them the right way or maybe less than the right way. And overall, he's going to talk with you about how to review those modules, get an opinion on them, use tools to evaluate them, and then walk through the process of making sure that your site's in good shape, both being clean and being safe with the modules and extensions that you're adding into sites. So with that, I'll pass it over to Will Strohl. Will Strohl, owner, president, CEO, fantastic all-around, magnanimous speaker, and representative for Hotcakes.
Well, that's a little hype. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you well.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be talking to the DNN user group. Thank you for having me. So I'm not going to go into, thanks Clint, I'm not going to be going into every aspect of keeping your site clean. That would take a long time. But I am going to focus on one part of that, which is evaluating your extensions, which in my experience is the most important part of keeping your site clean. There's going to be one slide missing from tonight, which is resources. I just didn't have enough time to kind of put that together. But before we make the slide deck available to the user group members, we will make sure that that slide's in there. As you can see, I'm from Hotcakes, and thanks for the fabulous introduction. So if you are interested in Hotcakes, you can email me there, as you can see on the bottom of that slide, and you can find out more about Hotcakes Commerce there by hotcakescommerce.com. If you want to contact me about anything community or anything else, you can find me on Twitter at Will Strohl. You can email me at willstrohl.com, or just go to willstrohl.com. All right. That contact information will be at the end as well, so if you didn't have time to grab that, you'll get that in a moment, unless you're watching a replay, in which case you can pause. All right. The requisite saying something about where I'm coming from. So this is not a presentation about hotcakes, but you're going to see it throughout the slide decks, or the slides in the deck. And hotcakes is an e-commerce CMS for everyone on your team. We focus on the types of businesses that aren't necessarily startups, but businesses that are selling online already and that have seen some success. And as a result, they have some requirements, right? You have an e-commerce platform where you need to plug in your ERP, your MailChimp, whatever it is, and that's where hotcakes starts to really shine. As many of the people on the call can probably attest to. So hotcakescommerce.com, and that's enough about hotcakes. All right, so moving forward. Like Ryan said, I'm Will Strohl. I've been using DNN since the first year, basically. Unfortunately, I wasn't one of the people that found it the very first month. I wish I was. But I'm also a DNN author, and several times over DNN technical editor as well. I'm a DNN MVP. I don't know, maybe 2 years now or something since I was eligible, and DNN Connect member as well. And I put that in there because that's really important. If you're not familiar with DNNConnect.org, that's an organization that's put together to help be there for DNN and the DNN community, and it's an organization, and so you can support that by becoming an actual member. Before I move forward anymore, I do want to put this out there. I'm not going to be going back and forth between the chats because that wouldn't be great for you in terms of me presenting information. So if there is any information or any questions that is relevant, feel free to just pop up anytime and say something, and I'll address whatever questions or anything that might come up. All right. So thanks, Clint. All right. So that's a neat little feature where it pops up the little message, the last message put in there. All right, so where are we here? So DNN uses extensions. I think hopefully everybody that's on the meeting knows that, unless you haven't touched DNN yet, and if you haven't, welcome. So the extensions are the primary cause of issues, and when I say issues, whenever you install any code into DNN, what you end up with is there's risk. Code can do lots of different things, and so whenever you hear people talk about upgrade issues and moving a site issues and pretty much any issue you can think of, most of the time it has to do with an extension that's doing something that's not supposed to do. And so extensions very directly impact the daily success of a site, and most notably it'll impact things like SEO and performance, and so that's very important to keep in mind. But the biggest point here is the quality of the extensions that you put on your site reflect upon DNN. So you can put yourself into somebody else's shoes. I'm a CEO of a little company over here who we've got $10 million of revenue a year, and we use DNN for putting up our marketing site. But whenever I go to the site, it's slow, or whenever I go to the site and click on something, it doesn't work right. What are we using for the website? Oh, it's DNN? Well, DNN sucks, right? And so that's the problem that we have here. So when extensions are poorly implemented, or when extensions are poorly chosen, it reflects upon DNN and in turn the community as well. And so that's why this is an important topic for me. So that being said, what will we not do? This is not a session about how do I do this in terms of some of the topics that we're going to go into. This has so many branching topics off of it that we could literally spend a whole day in sessions doing this. And this is not a best practices session either. So we will talk a little bit like here and there about like, hey, people should be doing this or people shouldn't be doing that. And those are indeed best practices, but this isn't a how-to on that. And we also will not be doing vendor bashing. So we're just going to keep that out of there. If for some reason you see something in my deck that you're able to tell what a vendor is, let's just keep that to ourselves. It's not good for anybody. But the very, very interesting thing here is I'm pretty sure everybody on here has used something other than DNN at some point, or actively right now. There's especially people doing services. You might be double dipping into other platforms, and so everything that we talk about today with DNN, it's not unique to DNN. This is not a DNN issue. This is not a CMS issue. This is a platform issue. So whenever you're talking to anybody who uses any platform that has plugins, this is an issue. So it's very much on you as a site implementation person, or somebody who owns a site or manages a site or is responsible for the site in some way. That's really good banter, guys. So whenever you're something,
keep a straight face while we have the peanut gallery going off.
Yeah. Well, this time it's not me participating, so that's good.
Right.
Now, so with the when we talk about these platforms, anything that has a marketplace, has an ecosystem, has an extension model, and you start plugging in other pieces of code, other functionality, you have the same issue. So I'm bringing this up because I did a lot of research recently where I was trying to figure out what's the ecosystem look like for CMS right now, and in part of that exercise, I wanted to know also, why do people love some of the platforms that they're on so much? Like there's people that are in this meeting every month and whatnot. There's people at all these events every year, but you have the same type of people with other platforms that will say, "Oh, I hate DNN," or DNN, "Oh, I hate WordPress." And so what I wanted to do in the exercise is figure out, well, why are people so adamant about that? It's almost like a religious conversation. You're like, "Oh, you can't use anything else. Mine's the correct one." So I wanted to figure out what that was. And one of the most common things that I found in my research was any one of these platforms, the extensions were a primary cause for people not liking it or saying that it sucks. So that's something that's very, very important to keep in mind. So and I also try to keep the rest of this information general enough to be able to apply to any other core competencies you might have, because you might be doing DNN, but you might also be doing Sitecore. You might also be doing not commerce or whatever. So that being said, I've used the word extension quite a few times, and so for anybody who might see this and is new enough to DNN to not know what that term is referring to, it's basically an app, right? It's an app that can be installed into DNN that does something, that adds additional functionality, and so there's lots of different types of extensions, and a few of them are listed here. And we're primarily tonight going to talk about modules and themes. And themes is a term that's interchangeable with the word skins whenever you see that anywhere. But there's also theme objects, there's JavaScript libraries, there's actual library projects, there's a number of different providers. So any of these, or actually all of these, are extensions. Now, where do we get them? There's the commercial side and the open source side, and so there's first and foremost there's the DNN Forge. So that's a place that a lot of people look for extensions first, and so that's the place where all the open source ones are. Then you have DNN Store. A lot of the open source ones are starting to be on the store as well, but that's where you primarily find commercial ones, so ones that you would pay for, whether it's some sort of subscription model or one-time purchase or whatnot. Now, you can also, there's also several that aren't listed on either place that you'll find in GitHub or Codeplex or both, and if you're not familiar with those areas, those are those are repositories where folks host the source code, but they also distribute the packages, and so the install packages and then the source code packages. So you can find some that are there that aren't listed in the other places. And then there's the Visual Studio logo is not here to mean that you can find an extension of Visual Studio, but it's meant to represent the other way that you get extensions is that you pay somebody to build you something custom. Right? And there's plenty of people in this call, that's the type of services they provide. You say, hey, I need this thing that doesn't exist, and somebody builds it and delivers it for you, or I need a custom design for my site because we have our own branding, and so they build it and they deliver it to you. But out of all of these sources, anything that's in the Forge has been tested somewhat, and you can see ratings and whatnot with it. Same with the DNN Store, and you can see feedback in the different discussion areas that you find in GitHub and Codeplex. But the things that you get from some sort of custom development work that you contract somebody for, that's the one that is the most dangerous. And what I mean by the most dangerous is you're going to get exactly what you paid for in a lot of cases, but most importantly, you don't have the benefit there of some of that crowdsourcing that you would normally get. So that's, out of all the types of extensions that you can have, those are the ones you need to put through the ringer the most. because I've seen extensions that were delivered by folks that didn't even have as much as having the prevention of having a max length on a text field, which is a really big security hole for denial of service attacks, or validation for that matter, or like you name the problem. The things that are delivered custom are always the ones that I find to be the most problematic on any website. Now, before we get into any more specifics, I do want to make sure that you know that I realize that I'm also speaking from a glass house, because with hotcakes, this is also an extension that installs into DNN, and so with that being the case, there is no software solution that's perfect, right? And so there's a couple things I'm going to talk about today that we also, as a company, hotcakes as a product, we need to adjust as well. And so I'm speaking from not just a perspective of user, not just somebody who runs a company, but somebody who runs a product, and somebody who talks to customers every day about some of these issues. So I'm not trying to throw stones at you. All right. So the first thing I want to do is talk about all extensions. And so there's a couple guidelines for all extensions. And so the first thing is there's this thing out there called EVS, the Extension Verification Service, and you can find that at evs.dnnsoftware.com. And when we're talking about passing EVS, every extension that you ever get delivered to you, you can upload it into it, and it'll go through and do all kinds of checks on it, and it will even spin up an instance of SQL Azure and test any database objects that it creates and whatnot, and it'll spit out some results and tell you, what versions of DNN can this run on, and no matter what the vendor says, what versions of DNN can this run on, and is it safe to install in Azure, and can it install properly, and any other errors that might show up. And the errors part is the really big one. If you see anything that's information or warnings, you do want to pay attention to those. But if you have an extension that's delivered to you or that you purchased or that you're interested in and it doesn't pass EVS, just walk away. That's just something you just don't want even to deal with. Another thing is being Windows Azure friendly. That's not as important for some site owners as others, but at some point, I'm also very much speaking to the system implementer folks out there and the vendors themselves, because you will run across clients who are on Azure or plan to go to Azure or may be on Azure one day, and you might have to move that site there. So if this cannot install in Azure, that's yet more work and cost that's going to need to be, that's going to be a surprise, quite frankly, to customers that you talk to. And so, they would say, hey, I want to go to Azure now. You're like, okay, cool, I want to put it over there. And, oh, we now got $3,000 more billable work because we have to do X, Y, and Z. Oh, well, that sucks. I thought you were just going to move my site. So it is very important, including documentation. And I don't, this is throwing a rock at myself because I have quite a few open source extensions out there. But if an extension doesn't have documentation, that's a clear red flag. And so that's something you want to look at. And it doesn't mean that every single thing needs to be documented, but if there's been some effort, that you can tell that something's at least has some activity and at least has some somebody who's curating it, who's maintaining it. And so one of the things is, just make sure there's some documentation. Obviously, the more that there is, the better, and the more you can trust them. The other thing is vendor being responsive to inquiries. If you try to talk to a vendor and it takes 1 or 2 days for them to get back to you, that's good that they got back to you, because sometimes people don't. But you definitely want somebody who's going to be responding to you, because at some point, and especially for a first time, if you're implementing it and you have a question, you don't want to be sitting there waiting for nobody to answer. And the other thing here is always comes in a package. And I cannot tell you how many organizations I went to where they don't even know what version an extension is, or how many times, sorry, that was a really good comment. How many times I've walked into situations, especially consulting-wise, where we're trying to figure out, versioning with an extension, or when a certain bug got implemented, or anything like that, and it's because whichever vendor was helping them out with their website, instead of just installing things and packaging things, they were using FTP and things like that in order to push things into the site, and that's a problem. You can't fix that kind of stuff. Now, my process. This is a checklist that's pretty general that I follow almost every single time, and it may look kind of time intensive, but I'll tell you this: if you put in this time up front, you're going to save yourself and your clients a lot of or your website in general, a lot of problems in the back end. The first thing is check the downloads. So a commercial extension won't necessarily show you how many downloads it has, but if it's an open source one, you generally can see that. So check the downloads. Is it popular? Are a lot of people downloading it, or are you the first one? Check the release dates. When's the last time it was released? How often was that? Do they do it once a year? Do they do it several times a year? These two things alone will give you a really good idea of the health of that project or the health of that product or that vendor. The next thing is checking reviews and ratings, and this is especially useful when we talk about DNN Store. You can see that information very prevalently. You can see that in Codeplex as well. On GitHub, not so much. In GitHub, you'd have to more or less look at the discussions area instead to see if people are having issues and whether or not they're being responded to and whatnot. Review the website. Hopefully, even as open source ones, hopefully they have a website and there's some marketing information on there. And this is mostly to see how much effort somebody's putting into it. For an open source extension, this is not a deal breaker for me. But if there's a website, more than likely that's where the documentation is. And I completely agree with you, David. David Wish's issues on GitHub was named something else. And I completely agree, and I fully expect with the number of projects that are on there right now on github.com, I fully expect that issues will be renamed something at some point. Yeah, so there's a tangent for you. If they don't have a website, that's, again, not a deal breaker, but when they have a website, that's a lot of times where you find the documentation, but more importantly, you can get an idea of what it is without you having to go any further, right? So I also have these in a specific order for a specific reason, and so, if I get to one of these and I find a deal breaker, I just save myself a ton of time if it's near the top. So the next point is reviewing the documentation. How much of it is it documented? Are the areas that I'm interested in documented? And this again is not a deal breaker, but it is going to be a red flag if I can't get things done here. With there being documentation there, that helps out a lot. And also, how is the documentation put out there? Is it put out there in a way where maybe I can put comments on there and ask questions or something like that? These things will give you an idea of not just the health of the product, but how well people are maintaining it and whether or not they're around. Live customer examples. You might find that on the website. You might find that on DNN Store. It is possible that you could find that on listings on the other sites as well. But this is good to kind of see, not just like, hey, I wonder if they have a big name they'll recognize, but just to get an idea of how other people have implemented it. And so that gives you a really good idea yourself how flexible it is and whether or not you see any examples of what you're trying to do. So live customer examples are really, really good. And sometimes they have demos, and so demos are good too. That'll help as well, and you'll find that a lot with themes. And then test support. This is something that is absolutely critical. Whether it's issues or on GitHub or the discussions on Codeplex or the help desk in DNN Store, whatever it is, come up with a question for whatever it is you're trying to do and ask it. And see if you get that response and what that response is. And if this is a commercial extension, this is an area where I have the least amount of leniency. Me personally, if I don't get a response the same day, that for me, it's not quite a deal breaker, but it probably will be depending on the rest of this stuff. If I'm gonna, if I'm gonna pay you money for an extension, for basically an application, I do expect for you to be around. Another thing is asking in the forums, and actually that probably should move up now that I'm reviewing it. But you can go to the forums, whether it's dnnsoftware.com or dnnconnect.org. Go on the forums, ask around, say, hey, is anybody using this extension? Here's what I'm trying to use it for. Anybody have any feedback? you'll probably find that somebody has used it and they have some relevant information that you can use, and so that's probably one of the even more powerful than reading the documentation, reviewing the site. So ask in the forums, find out. If somebody doesn't know, then hopefully come back to the thread and let people know what your experience is when you're done. The next thing is run the package through EVS, and EVS is a tool. I described what it does, a lot of what it does, but the process that it runs the extension through, it takes somewhere like 5 to 10 minutes, or at least it feels that long, and so that's part of the reason that's lower down on the list. You could just, of course, throw that up a little bit higher as well. And then the next thing I do is install the package locally. And so when I say locally, I'm speaking more with my developer hat on. But if I have a site that I can safely break, I'll go ahead and take that extension and I'll back up the site first, even if it's one I know I can break. But then I'll install it locally just to see if I can, if I run into any issues. And so that gives me a chance to not just see if any issues happen during the actual install, but you also want to do things like check the event viewer, because sometimes issues do happen, but they're suppressed, and so you want to check the event viewer, check your error log and the log for net files as well, just to see if anything bad happened. And then the last thing is try to do what you're figuring to do with it. I can tell you the last site I built for myself was a memorial site, and I needed a form management type module, right? Some sort of forms module, and there's lots of them out there. You'll of course hear like Too Sexy. You'll hear of Open Forms, which we saw Open Content earlier. Open Forms is by the same developer, a very good module. There's Live Forms, there's Action Forms, there's all kinds of them out there. Those are probably the 4 most popular as far as I'm aware. But there's lots of them out there, and so I needed to do something, and I was even willing to pay for the extension if I found something that fit the bill. But all the ones I just mentioned actually were in the running there, and all of them made it to the proof of concept, but only one of them actually allowed me to do what I needed to do, and so the proof of concept is very, very important. All right. Oh, form and list. Thank you, Clint. Yeah, that's another good one. So here's a shout out to .NET New Scott Wilkinson. He last I heard was going to revive that project, so hopefully that happens. Was there a question?
No, it was an Xmod comment from the thing that got.
Oh, of course. Yeah, of course. I wouldn't put that in the same category, though. That's basically like a rapid application development tool, right? You can do forms too. That's just one of the things that it does. Is that fair to say?
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. All right. So that's it with my process. Moving on to themes, aka skins. So with themes and modules, I was planning to do a demo. Even earlier today, I was putting together some things for demos, but I realized that I couldn't demo anything useful without breaking rule number 3 from that slide earlier in the deck, which is vendor bashing. So I got some screenshots where I've hidden some stuff in this exercise. So I'm not going to be doing a demo today. All right, but with that, guidelines for themes. So one of the things that's you may think is like obvious is clean HTML. Does it have clean HTML? Is it using a common framework, and is it using it correctly? These are things you want to check, especially if you're having somebody deliver this to you. And if it's table based, for example, tall order indeed. These things, these first 2 ones, sound very simple, stupid, sound very obvious, sound like things that you should just expect, but I will tell you from experience that is just not the case. You do need to check these, and especially if you're paying somebody. I don't know how many companies you've dealt with, but there's a lot out there that end up cutting corners for any number of reasons. The next thing is use CDN first, and I'm looking at all of you who develop commercial skins. There's a lot of folks that say, well, what if the customer needs to debug, or what if the customer needs to use X, or what if, well, I'll tell you, what if the customer needs their site to run fast? That's the only thing that matters. your skins that you are buying or downloading or using or even building for that matter, if you're including scripts, especially frameworks and things, CSS, if it's not custom, you should be getting it from a CDN. And if you need to provide a different version that has the differences in terms of using local files versus CDN files, that's fine too. But at the end of the day, if I'm running a website, I don't want to use a non-CDN, because when I actually use this, I'm not going to be debugging it. I'm going to be deploying it on a real website. And then the next thing is for anything that is local, or especially if it's like the other version of that, maybe nothing is or everything is local, it should be using the client dependency framework or the what is it, the resource management, what's this first part, something resource manager, I forget the C. Anybody remember? This is client resource management, thank you. All right, that was Ralph. Thank you for participating, Ralph. So the client dependency framework is actually what runs behind the scenes of the client resource management tool. And we're not saying use this because of minification, because there are some minification features in there, but by and large the minification features in the CRM tool don't work well on almost any site I've seen. But it does a great job of putting things in the right places and in the right way. So the CRM really should be used if you're looking at your skin. And I'll give you some examples why in a moment. Another thing is minified files are default, and this goes back to the what ifs. Those what ifs are a killer when you are trying to implement a site. But minified files should be the default that are used. Again, if somebody needs to debug, there could be another version for that, or there could be an instruction file on how to turn things differently to be debug versus non-debug. There's a lot of ways to handle that. The default should be minified, because again, somebody's going to install this, and especially if this is a trial version or something, right? If this is some sort of trial, then that's a problem, because you've just given them the slowest version of what you could possibly give them. It includes a doc type. Again, this is something that you might think is, I don't know, obvious, but doc type is incredibly important today, especially when we talk about how many designs and even any other dependencies in your site require for there to be a doc type there, because things won't work right. Certain frameworks won't even begin to execute correctly if the doc type's not there and it's not correct. So the doc type must be there. Hard coding is not as easy to determine. The only place that I see this abused, or the most common place I see this abused, and I'm going to put abused in air quotes because it's not necessarily a worst practice, but the most common place I see this used is for a logo, and while that's not a horrible thing, when you hard code a logo, now the logo is no longer something that can be managed by DNN itself, right? But hard coding in general is just bad. So if it's something that can and has a configuration option, you really should be doing that. Let's see here. Content images not in the package. Oh my goodness. So I mostly see this done. So what I mean by that, so you have this package that's delivered to you with skin, and so as part of that, and especially when I'm primarily here talking about vendors who deliver a skin to folks, right? And so XYZ company, we build skins for people, or themes. We build themes for people, and so I go there, I buy a theme from them, and I go and I install that on my site, right? So that's what I'm talking about here. So when I install that on my site, there may be a bunch of content images in there, and the reason they're there is because whoever was building it, they were building it in a development environment, and that development environment, they were doing the right thing by putting it into source control. But one of the things that they would do is also put all the images into that package, and now all the images that people upload are part of the skin package, which generally gets installed into the super user or the host or the _ default directory in your site, which not everybody, in fact very few people, have access to. And now you got content images in a location that people can't manage, and especially moving forward. So content images should not be in a package when this is delivered to you. And the last one is a pet peeve of mine. But I know why people do it. Now, so there's does not include everything. What I'm referring to here is commercial skins primarily, and I know why people do it, and it's something that I don't have an easy solution to. But I rather you have everything else right and not this. I can use modules for everything else, and because what you'll find is in the commercial skins or themes, I don't know if I'll ever be able to say themes first, but we'll figure it out. But whenever you talk about the commercial themes, they have a very bad, in my opinion, this is a commentary here, they have a very bad habit of including every single plugin you could possibly ever put into the site ever in the future. But there's two problems with that. One, I might use one of those. And so now there might be 10 or more that I'm not going to use, but now they're part of my payload. But two, if I'm not using those now, but I put it in there because maybe I'll use that in the future, I don't know how much everybody in the room or those watching this later, I don't know how often you keep up with what are the latest plugins for, I don't know, a slide or whatever it is, but that stuff changes, and it changes fast. So by the time I install this to the time I decide I need that tool, what you have in there is going to be outdated for one in terms of versioning, but it might be replaced by something better. Right? So including everything in there has those as problems, but there's also the third thing of the performance overhead that will bring to you as well. And then there's all kinds of other things that could spider out of that, like conflicts with other tools and other modules that you have. I cannot, when I get a commercial skin and it has all this stuff, the first thing I do is rip everything out. Were there any questions on this? Oh, good point, David. Yeah, licensing. So basically, that's a big black hole. All right. So I want to give you an example here of a skin I cleaned up, and I'm going to be throwing rocks at myself right now. This is not the first time I ran into it, so you'd think I would have learned my lesson. And so, again, this is a part of the reason that this is kind of a passion point for me. But this is the header of a specific skin file that was delivered to me. And, you know, I can nitpick on a lot of things. I used to train folks on how to build skins. You know, that used to be my day job at DNN Corp. So, you know, I'm very, very familiar with scenarios and why you do certain things and what's a best practice versus a worst practice versus a gray area. You know, and all the different use cases, right? Potentially. Now, the screenshot you're seeing here, you might see that like there's some red stuff here. You know, those only look like errors just because of how I grabbed the screenshot. This actually is not errored, so that's not the problem here. But there are several problems here. First, there's some skin objects being used here that I don't need. I don't need the search, don't need the logo. They're clearly not being used, so they can be removed, and they should be removed. Excuse me. There's also these skin paths in there. That was the best practice for a DNN theme in version 4. Since then, the world has changed. The only time you use that is when you have to. All of these scripts that you see in here are coming in here, they're coming into the site in two ways that are awfully bad. For one, you know, they're being brought from the local site, and so if you know anything about how browsers load a web page, it only loads so many requests at a given time. So I think the average for the browsers is something like 6 requests from the same domain at once. And so, you know, you can see here that I'm going to, not even including images or the page itself, I already got like 12 or maybe more now, maybe almost 15 or 20 downloads that are going to happen before somebody sees the web page. That's a big problem. The other problem here is that you can see they're all using script tags. If you know anything about how a theme gets rendered onto the page, all of these are going to be part of the body now. And so these all now have become what's known as render blocking scripts. People can't see the page until these are all parsed. That's, again, another performance issue. But in this case, it's a perception of a performance issue. So this was a skin that was delivered to us, and the problem that we had here was that this alone accounted for 80% of our load time issues. Just by fixing this, I was able to gain an 80% increase in performance, just this alone. And so, you know, what that ended up looking.
Do you have the before versus after version of this same set? Oh, good, you do.
Yeah. So I removed everything that wasn't being used. I used the client resource management tool. And for the things that I couldn't put into the client resource management tool, you know, there is still some optimization that can be done here in terms of putting the, shoot, I forget the, there's like the async tag that, or attribute that you can put in some of these tags. That's the only thing that you don't see in the screenshot actually, is the render blocking handling of those types of things. But, you know, this is what it actually should look like. So everything that could be coming from a CDN, first and foremost, is. You can see that they're all coming from cdnjs.cloudflare.com, which is one of the more popular CDNs out there. But you know, the cool thing about this is, for the folks that aren't initiated here, is that it's pulling those from the same location as many other sites. And so these might be requests that your folks that are looking at the web page might not even need to ever download. So these that alone will help increase your page or decrease your page load time. There's other things where, like, jQuery is a built-in tool. Like, I shouldn't have to, you know, ask for that explicitly. And there was in putting this into place, you know, I had to go through this process that was kind of drawn out, where I'd replace one script and just make sure that everything worked real quick. Replace the next one, make sure everything worked real quick. Because if you did this all at once, you wouldn't know which script was the problem. And so I went through this step by step with each of these scripts, and luckily when I got down to the bottom one there with the social button initialize.js, that one was throwing some errors with some of this other stuff. And so what I found was that it was loading at a time when it shouldn't have, and so that's yet another reason to use the DNN include, which is the CRM bit there. So that we were talking about earlier. And so what I was able to do is change the priority for that to basically load last after all the rest of these, and that allowed everything to load without error. And then just this change alone allowed, you know, it's very embarrassing to say, but the page load times for this, when you weren't logged in with somebody with editing capabilities, the page load times were like 13 seconds. That is incredibly slow. And if I was logged in, it could be, depending on any number of variables, I don't know why, but that could more than double sometimes to be as much as 30 seconds. And so this was a killer. And so to that end, the very closest thing that you're going to have to a demo today is that, you know, just to give you a side-by-side, this is basically all of the changes that had to be made to this, right? And so you can see that a lot of this stuff was removed, and different things were replaced. But at the end of the day, you know, not only is this using the best practices, but it's cleaner. All right. So any questions on that part before we move to the next part?
That was excellent.
All right. So this, again, is not a how to do best practices, so I'm not going to really dive any more into this right now. But one of the things I did see a comment pop up about async. If you Google, like, you know, how to fix render blocking scripts, one of the first results that you're most likely going to find, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but there's a very good blog article that walks you through the differences between using async and not async, and some other ways to prevent scripts from impacting the perceived page load time, because there's a difference between your page being loaded and when the person actually sees it. Because, you know, it is very possible that everything that the page needs to load is already downloaded and in the browser, but the browser has to do a bunch of stuff before it can show it to you. And so that's where the render blocking scripts come into place. All right, so modules. Going to go into modules next. So with modules, again, clean HTML. Again, I wish I didn't have to say that, but the reality is, and especially when we're talking about open source modules, but commercial ones are a victim of this as well, especially at the current price point. If there are any vendors in the DNN ecosystem, or any ecosystem for that matter, are listening, if you're having problems doing clean HTML because you can't, you know, get a UX person involved or something like that, reality. And that's a very big reality in our ecosystem. I've been saying for many years now, charge more. You do need to charge more. If you look at DNN and how it's used and what it's applied for and the people that typically implement it, DNN is an enterprise-ready platform. So with that should be some enterprise pricing. And I'm not talking about Evoke here. I'm just talking about in general. Pricing is a problem across our ecosystem. But that's another tangent. So modules, some common things here. Uses a common framework. So that's when it's using features and functionality that aren't part of DNN. But absolutely best practice is to use those that are part of DNN whenever possible first. The times that you stray away from that are when your modules need to do things that DNN just can't do. So that's when we start to bring in things like Angular and stuff like that. But use DNN form patterns. So the first time that let me give you some background. So I've worn pretty much every hat in every company that I've ever been in. My role whenever I came into a company was always one thing, but it always ended up being something else, which was we have a problem, can you figure out how to solve it? And that's been the role I fulfilled pretty much everywhere I've been. And so as such, I'm not the expert in any specific area. I'm the classic, jack of all trades, master of none, or whatever. So I'm saying all that to say this: I'm not a designer, and so creating an elegant front end is not something that I can readily do. But luckily, there's lots of things out there that help me appear to be that person. And so DNN comes with form patterns. If you're not using form patterns, why? There's lots of extensions that I've touched out there, and some of them paying a little bit of money for, and they're not using form patterns and look just awful. It doesn't take very much time to implement those form patterns. In fact, it's less HTML than most of these extensions are using that aren't implementing the form patterns. And not only will it be less work overall, but that's going to be something that's maintained by DNN moving forward that you don't have to worry about, and also it looks like you know what you're doing. And so, when it doesn't look good, when it doesn't look like the rest of the platform, that's again something that reflects upon the platform, but more importantly, it reflects upon the quality of the work that you're delivering. So that's very, very important. The same arguments for CDN and CDF, CRM. I've seen the same things in modules that I just showed you in that skin almost every time I see something custom, especially. The render blocking scripts, I see that more so in modules, and I have an example here in just a moment, so I'll leave that be for then. And again, minified files are default. I don't see that in modules. In some of the commercial modules, it's very interesting because what I'm seeing is a combination of local and CDN scripts being used, but even the CDN scripts are not pointing at the minified. It's like they were developing, and as such, when they're developing, they need to use the non-minified version because they do need to debug. At that point, it's not an if, they're developing. But when they deliver it, even the ones coming from CDN are not the minified ones. So minified files need to be the default, and so I see lots of extensions right now that are doing one or the other. Now, ideally, and I'm one of those, by the way. But ideally, what should be happening is, if you have that what if in a module, it's incredibly simple to put a setting in there to say, hey, throw it in debug mode, or load the minified, or don't load scripts. It's actually not very much work at all to make that happen. As an example, the very first versions of the CodeCamp module that I submitted to the contest, they actually had those settings. They had those features. So you can actually see that in the source code history. Unfortunately, with the SPA framework, the way it's implemented, that's not possible because you can't do conditional files. So that's something that would have to be changed right before deployment. But outside of that, that's something that could be easily done. And modules, again, do not include everything. But that's just being a good product manager, right? You only should be including things that are part of the goal for the customers, and sometimes that means customer says, hey, I want X, Y, and Z, and you say, well, I'm not going to add that feature. I'm sorry, and that's okay. Even if you lose that particular customer, you do still need to stay true to the entire customer base that your particular extension is appealing to. So do not include everything. You need to include everything that matters. Is what that really should be. Now, in giving you an example here, I want to play the "What is that doing there" game, because that's what I was going into in this next exercise, is why is that there? So, render blocking scripts. This is all right. Oh, this is just the header actually. We're going to get to the render blocking. So, why is that there? I was looking at this. This is a home page. Why is there a WYSIWYG CSS there? I don't know. Why is there a color picker there? I don't have a color picker. My skin doesn't have a color picker. Why is that there? The bootstrap tags input. I don't need that tag thing where it auto completes tags. Why is that there as well? There's something with forms in here. I have a form on the page, but the only thing on this particular page that's even remotely close to a form is a one-field newsletter submission. Right? That's it. I don't know why those are there. So in looking at ways to optimize this particular site, I had to play the "why is that there" game and try to figure that out. And on the same page, why is all that stuff there? I'm not using any of that. Well, in the first one, I have to pretty much tell you none of what's in there because every single bit of that's going to tell you the vendor. But when I started to look through all this, I don't need any of this stuff. Again, I just have a newsletter thing on the form, right? Like, why is Angular being put in there? It's not using Angular. And by the way, every script in here that you see except for the Microsoft Ajax, including the collapse scripts, are all part of the same module. So every single one of those scripts, JavaScript and closing script, I can expand all of those. Every single one of them are part of the same module. And this is right below the form tags, as you can see here. And what that ends up doing is blocking the rendering time. All of these are in the wrong place. Now, that being said, there are going to be times where certain things do absolutely need to be there. But they are, by severe standards, the exception. I would venture to say less than 5% of the time should something be here. But what this clearly is somebody said page.register script, so the developers out there, you know what I'm talking about, page.register script, insert it in there, instead of doing things through the framework or even just using page.put in the header, right? So this was a huge issue, and this particular module, out of all the ones on the site, is the slowest, and it's primarily because of this. All right. Now, that being, oh, actually, I'll get to how I fix this later because there's no way to fix this. This is with the vendor, so we'll get to that. Any questions in this part?
No, it's good info. Curious to see what you did do. If you're saying it was with the vendor, you worked around it, you got an optimizer to run through your code first. What'd you do?
We got a slide for that. All right. So later in the process. So a lot of this is in the context of I'm building a site. Help save me from myself, right? But what if my site is already up? So, we can still do all this. So, if my site's already up, I'm going to have to optimize my site configuration. So this is a great time. That bullet point is that, one spider thread or that, one octopus leg over to, people like Ernst Peter or Mitch Sellers who have great resources on how to optimize your website. I'd tell you to go those areas for site configuration optimization. Minimize all scripts and CSS in the installation, and you can see here it says even and especially DNN and third-party vendors. Even DNN itself is guilty for a lot of the stuff I'm talking about right now. So there are literally something like, oh, actually, I have a slide for that, so I'll get to that in a little bit. But minimize all scripts. There are a ton of scripts and CSS in the core and in all of the modules in the core and that get delivered to you that are not optimized already. And when I mean optimized, I mean it's been minimized using some sort of tool and at the very least is taking out white space. And I have a slide to show you how powerful that actually is. And then optimize your themes. So I was talking about optimizing themes just a moment ago, so you have some information about that. excuse me, optimizing your server. Optimizing your server is just as important as the rest of the stuff, as long as you're not in shared hosting, because there's a lot of things going on in your server that you can fix all this other stuff, and if your server is not optimized, then all this other stuff is not necessarily wasted effort, but you know, the server is the first line of attack there. Whenever you do like these scans on things like Google PageSpeed or Web Page Test as examples down there, your server is going to be one of the things that it tests to see how it's working or whatever. Now, optimizing your server, if you're not a sysadmin, you know, somebody who is very familiar with how servers are put together and how they should be configured and maintained over time, that there are tools to help you. And the one I found that's really, really, really good is Lean Sentry. I actually have a blog post from when I last upgraded willstrohl.com about Lean Sentry and how it helped me track down all kinds of issues. Lean Sentry is insanely good, and actually I didn't even know that existed. It was Jess Coburn at Applied Innovations, appliedi.net. They host willstrohl.com and hotcakescommerce.com. But when I was running into these issues, him and I have a good relationship. I was like, hey man, what's going on here? And he pointed me to Lean Sentry because he knows the guys, and the guys who well, I don't know if they're all guys. They might be. I don't know. But the folks at Lean Sentry, they're actually former. Thank you, David. They're actually former Microsoft employees that managed server software, the server software. So those folks, I talked to them, and they heard about what I was doing and whatnot, and they gave me a free license to track all this stuff down, and I blogged about them. But that tool helped me fix a ton of issues on the server. And in fact, we have a customer at Hotcakes where that was one of the things that we did all the things to optimize that we possibly could. He's like, hey, my site's still slow. I told him to try out Lean Sentry, and he came back and with all these praises and stuff. There's a lot of things that could be slowing your server down, so you want to look for that, or any other software that's similar to Lean Sentry. If you're on a web host, get them involved. They might know something else that's going on, or maybe resources is an issue. They can help you track those things down, or increase them for you. Obviously not for free, but the other things is look for other things that your server might be doing and maybe shouldn't be, or maybe could be doing differently. Like you probably can't go without antivirus, but is the antivirus you're using the right one, right? So those are a lot of things that you want to look for in terms of optimizing your server. And whether it's regardless to your website, remove everything that's not essential. And again, this is going to come to the what if thing. So this is when you're going to have to look at yourself in the mirror and tell yourself to stop saying what if. What if one day I am going to have that slider that I've been talking about? What if one day I'm going to, finally turn on that page that has that one module on there that's been on there for a year? You know what? Remove everything that's non-essential. Was there a question?
No. Sorry. Projector here is going to run out of battery in a minute. Go on.
Oh, well, are you going to be able to fix that?
Yeah, it's local. We'll work on it.
All right. No worries. So this is a built-in tangent. In this entire process of cleaning out sites, the most recent one, I knew about the setting and I knew what it's supposed to do, but I didn't know how to use it, which is funny because I wrote the chapter on that. So the use JavaScript library CDN. You check it, and then magically stuff happens, and you're like, why and how does this stuff happen? And it took some digging, and actually I had to end up going into the source code to figure this out, the source code of DNN. But I did some digging, and you can install JavaScript libraries, and so this is a setting for the actual JavaScript library's extension point. So when you turn this on, when you say use the CDN, the different libraries that you have will have a CDN URL defined. And so when you go to edit that extension, you can go and see where it's pointing to and choose whether or not you want to change it to something else. But the other cool thing is, too, is it tells you if there's any dependencies. So that's just a little tangent, a little tidbit, bonus piece of information for you guys. Now, in this exercise, I couldn't find my original test from the site that I've been talking about, that I've been throwing rocks at myself for. So I have a screenshot here of a client, which is why you see it read out, or censored, redacted. we can say those. But this is pretty much identical to what the site is that I've shown you all these examples from, except I think the compressed transfer was much lower. I think it was like a C or D on that site. But Keep Alive is super simple. Like getting that as an A should be super simple for everybody. And David, that's a very good point. I never use the Telerik CDN or the Microsoft CDN, especially together. You put them together and your site is broken. You have to fix it through SQL. Anyway, so I'm talking to comments there. So if you're actually watching this in replay, I'm sorry you missed what that was. All right. So anyway, when I use this, this is if you're not familiar with this is a web page test. This is one of my favorite tools for testing a site, and Google PageSpeed is a good one too. There's lots of other ones, and they're all good. But I found that using these two together give me a pretty good comprehensive idea of what's going on. So if you're using other tools and it's working well for you, so be it. This isn't a selling for them, even though they're free. But when you look at what this does, it gives you an idea. Web page test gives you an idea of not just how fast your page is loading, but the perception of how fast it's loading. However, the thing I found with using this tool, and it's probably true of the other ones, and I know it's true of PageSpeed, is that when you use this tool on your site, no matter what, the very first time you run it, if it's been more than like 10 minutes or something, whatever your first score is, forget about it. Don't even worry about it. Just run the test again, because for whatever reason, the very first time it runs, it ends up with like a non-cache version or something like that. It doesn't know anything about it, and so when you run it that very second time right after, and you need to wait like 30 seconds for the second time, but when you run it that second time, it'll be what people actually see, because like with a web browser, some things have been cached or something. So that second test gives you a better score. But that being said, both scores are relevant, because there always is a first-time page load. Yeah, so I wanted to point that out, like the score here. Now, I went through the process of minification, and I minified every single script and CSS file on the site that wasn't already minified, and there's a lot of them. So there is about 90 folders that I went through in a clean install. That's omitting all the ones that were in there from other extensions being installed. So that's 90 core folders that have at least one CSS or JavaScript file that wasn't already minified. That's a lot. Now, not all of them will be used on every page load, but they all end up being used at some point. So if you are not into doing all of those files, or you don't have the time to use a tool to go through all those files, or create a tool to go through all those files, I completely understand that. So what you probably want to do instead is load the pages that are getting viewed, or the pages that you are worried about, and do an inventory of the scripts and CSS that are loaded for those pages, and then just focus on those. But in doing this, you can see the range of savings in terms of compression. So with JavaScript, you can see that it went anywhere from like 92% all the way to 780% in terms of bytes saved. That is a lot of data being saved in terms of bandwidth going back and forth, and that also, when we look at this for CSS and JavaScript, you put that all combined, that doesn't just save for every page load, that saves for all page loads, it saves for your bandwidth, it saves for server processing, and it saves you in terms of being able to have concurrent users. So if you're worried about scale, this helps. So you do need to do these things. Now you can see that this is anecdotal. I didn't put this in a spreadsheet and actually do the average, but anecdotally what I saw was on average, I saved at least 150% on most JavaScript files I read into. The stats that you see here is I just grabbed a few random ones before the presentation, when I was pulling the presentation together. And with CSS, the average reduction I saw, or the average compression, was about 60%. So that 200% you see there is actually an anomaly. Most of them didn't reach 100, which is interesting. Now, the thing with compressing the CSS that I found is that you cannot compress it all the way for all the files on the site, meaning you can't remove all the line breaks. There's a lot of things in DNN that will break if you remove line breaks, so you need to actually just remove all white space in terms of CSS and not remove the line breaks. With the JavaScript, an interesting thing I found, one extension that I was using, and again, they shall remain nameless, but this particular vendor was very responsive, and I'm going to talk about dealing with vendors or working with vendors later, but they were very responsive. But they were, whenever I compressed the jQuery scripts, because just so you know, there's 3 different jQuery scripts in DNN, and there's also 3 knockout scripts, and all 3 of them get used at some point. But one of the jQuery scripts, if I changed almost anything about it, it seemed that it broke this one extension, just this one. That particular page would not load, and it would give me a server error. And what it ended up being was that the way that jQuery is being included was doing some additional checks to check for the version of the script file. And so it wasn't just saying, hey, DNN API, give me the jQuery file. It was saying, hey, look for the jQuery file location, check the location version number, and make sure that that version number also matches the version number inside the script. It was doing all of that. And I know that because the vendor told me. But all that wasn't necessary. So that could have just been, I called the API. It's literally one line of code. And so that was an instance where I had to go work with the vendor. And so for a little while, my shiny green A from web page speed was down to like a C just from that one script file. All right. But after this process, what I end up with, just by minifying things and just making a few tweaks to how skins and modules work, I got A's and everything here, except for when I took the screenshot. Compress images was an F. I didn't do another screenshot today. I should have, but I was in a rush, and so I just used all my existing screenshots. But anyway, compress images is very easy. You can there's actually a website called compress.io, I think it is, or compressor.io, and that tool, no matter what you do in Photoshop or whatever tool of choice you're using, you can compress things in there, but you throw it back through that compressor.io or compress.io, and it ends up compressing it even more. And so, like, I've seen most of our JPEGs and our PNGs get reduced by sometimes as much as 100%, which was very, very interesting.
Bill, it's a well-known item in Photoshop that designers aren't familiar with, but JPEGs specifically used to be better compressed out of Photoshop, but newer versions of Photoshop save more data than they need to, even when you're saving a level quality 7 or an 8 JPEG. And many of these tools use the same compressions that Photoshop itself uses, but it maximizes them, and you don't increase jaggies, you don't increase picture problems, and you can compress it 2 and 3 times the amount. So it is always worth taking things, even if they were done by a designer out of Photoshop and they're well done, and running them through compressors like this again.
Yeah, that's good input. And by the way, like I mentioned. Actually, I shouldn't say that. That'll end up bridging over into vendor bashing. All right, moving on. So I ran into all these issues, and I was looking at the core, and I'm like, why is this like this? And so, of course, I went to our MVP forums and said, hey, I want to know, like, is this something that we can fix? And so it started a good dialogue in terms of, why are we not compressing all this stuff even in the core? Why isn't the core of DNN itself being sent to us fully optimized, ready to deploy on a website? And so we had a great dialogue on here, and so what it ends up being is there is a JIRA item. Unfortunately, it says it's a low priority, but I can tell you that with DNN 9, Webpack's being used to compress a lot of the scripts. So while that may or may not be just in the control panel, not control panel, what do we call it? Persona bar, I guess it's being called now. While it may or may not be just there, with that being implemented into the core, that means that could be used for the rest of it as well. So that's really good news. All right, so moving forward. So my site's already up. So when we're talking about modules and skins or themes, when we're looking at these, if my site's already up, this isn't just a, hey, I'm building my site for the first time thing. Whenever I add a new extension, I still want to follow through with that review. And so if I have issues with this, you do want to contact the vendor. And if the vendor is a commercial vendor, you know, in that particular case, you could and you should demand a solution. If it's an open source one, you might get told to, you know, help contribute, and that's okay. But if you don't have the skills to do that, it kind of puts you in a precarious boat, right? So the key here is be ready to jump ship and have a plan B. You know, you do, if this is something that's important to you, you do need to address it, and so you do need to jump ship. You do need to find an alternative. But I'll tell you that I contacted several vendors about some of the issues I was having, and you know, in my experience, you know, all but one was very, very forthcoming and very helpful. You know, one of them not so much, and that may or may not be your experience as well. So for that particular one, we are jumping ship. So you know, that's the next slide, jumping ship. So jumping ship from something you found that works, you know, it sounds really scary. Oh no, I gotta leave this thing now. But you know, there is a plan. There's something you can do. You know, you can find a suitable replacement. And you know, when you were doing your evaluation, you probably had a second place. Like, you know, if this one doesn't work out, I can use this one. So you can move to that. You can have a replacement built. So if you do have resources, having a replacement built, you know, through like a services provider, like, you know, many of the folks are part of this user group, or if you have your own resources, building your own, you know, you can have a replacement built. And the really good thing about that, while there's some, there is some expense there, right? There's some investment required to make that. You know, you end up with something that meets, exactly, David, that basically, well, actually, I think you might have been talking about something else. I just saw a comment pop up about meeting needs. But the good news is about those two other choices is that you end up with something that meets exactly what you need, but it doesn't have all the other stuff that you don't. Right? You have exactly what you expected and what you desire and what you need at that time. It literally meets your requirements, and that is a lot more valuable than saving, you know, let's say, you know, $2,000 now and then having to deal with all these other things later and ongoing dealing with these things. And you know, if you look at this from a business perspective, if these things are actually causing your website to function improperly, how much money are you losing from the folks that aren't staying on your site because one of these extensions are rogue? I think that's worth the investment of having your own extension built. So here's a part for the vendors, because I'm a vendor. You know, basically, you're gonna, as a vendor, at some point you will be faced with, you know, issues that, like, hey, this is broken, or this is a bug, or you know, there's performance issues, and you absolutely must address those if you want, even if you're open source, if you wish to be relevant, right? And it's not just a vendor in our ecosystem or in any other, you know, ecosystem like WordPress or whatever. A vendor in general. If you build software, you have to be prepared for this. So, you know, the key here is a customer-first approach always, because every time somebody comes to you with a bug, you know, it's a problem, and for them, it may be the worst problem ever. And while in the grand scheme of things, even they will later tell you it's not, it is at the time. It's a very big problem. It's a very, you know, they're very concerned, you know, and you don't know why, and it doesn't really matter. But you know, they could, you know, be on the hook for this. You know, they might be having to go in a meeting every single day with their boss. You know, stressing out first thing in the morning, like, why is it still this way? Well, I talked to so. You gotta make it a customer-first approach. This is a problem. Acknowledge the problem, and so in acknowledging the problem is, you know, it's kind of basically like a support 101 thing, where like, hey, you know, you're reporting that this thing is wrong. I'm really sorry that you're finding this to be an issue or whatever, and we're going to do everything we can to try to fix it. But you need to be transparent, because sometimes you can't fix it that moment. Right? Sometimes you have to put it on, because, you know, at the end of the day, anybody who builds software is either participating in a business or that is their business, and unfortunately there's always priorities, right? And so those priorities may not always be things that you understand or agree with, but those priorities have to be acknowledged, and so sometimes you'll run into a case where like, oh, I really want us to, you know, make those all minimized, but here's a workaround to make that happen, and in the meantime, know that this is on our list. We're gonna absolutely get to this, but we just can't do it right now, and I'm very, very sorry. So address the issue. But when you're not the vendor and you're kind of talking to the vendor, you know, I had an instance where, like, hey, I'm not going to do this because it's not going to sell me more licenses. That was literally said to me. And I understand why it's said to me, and you know, I'm somebody who has had those conversations as well on that particular side. But at the end of the day, you know, the cost of doing that is very different, and I have a slide at the end to talk about that cost. So you know, if you're a customer talking to a vendor and trying to get this stuff done, and you can sense that it's a cost issue or a priority issue or something like that, you know, try to offer some sort of marketing trades. You know, say, hey, I'll do a case study for you. Let's do, you know, something to kind of do this. And a lot of vendors as well will offer the opportunity for you to kind of skip the line, so to speak. So, you know, if that doesn't work, you can also say, and again, this depends on how important this is to you, but you can also say, hey, you know what, we'll sponsor that development. How much is that going to cost? Or we'd consider sponsoring that development. How much would that cost, and how soon can you do that? And that's something we've done as well. So you have a lot of options when it comes to a vendor, but also being a vendor, you know, you've got to address the issue. All right. So let's see here. So just talking to vendors specifically, so any vendors looking at me right now, well, except for the replay. I keep forgetting about that. Well, actually, can you guys still see me? Is your projector still doing okay?
Yeah, you're in good shape.
All right, cool. All right, so so load the scripts in CSS only. What was that?
No, just reading ahead and left. Sorry.
Oh, got it. So loading the scripts in CSS only when absolutely required. So in one of the in the screenshot of the module that was loading a bunch of stuff after the form tag, all of those things were necessary if I was logged in as somebody who can edit and if I was in their edit view, right? So none of that stuff was necessary for the front-end page view. So it wasn't required for any of those things to be loaded. I know exactly what they're for and why they're there and what they're associated with. But they weren't at all necessary for the page load that one of my customers would see, or you know, anybody who's visiting my site. So your scripts in CSS and the things that you build for folks only need to be loaded and present on the page load when they're necessary. All right. Again, refrain from render blocking scripts at all costs. There's very few instances where there should be a render blocking script. And I don't think I completely said what a render blocking script is, but one of the attributes of it is you find it at the top of the page versus the bottom, right? So if you find it at near the opening body tag. Let's see here. Use minified third-party libraries. So that's kind of a review. Now this next one bullet goes back to something that I kind of mentioned earlier, where a vendor was using an old way of doing something that was, at the time, probably very, very necessary. But over time, it's kind of like us, you know, sometimes we code out some code.
You're on fire.
That was literally my fire alarm.
Yeah.
And there's two of them that went off, actually. That was weird.
Go check, see if somebody's cooking something.
No, I'm here by myself. That was weird. All right, hopefully that doesn't happen again. So let's see here. Okay, so learn updated best practices of DNN Web. So what I was talking about was like the vendor was doing something that was probably very necessary back in the day, and it looked like code that might have been written for version 4.9 when jQuery was first implemented, because then that would have been very necessary. But you know, since then, again, it's, you know, like one line of code. So at some point, somebody should have updated that. And so, but it's one of those things where it becomes technical debt, and a lot of times technical debt is not intentional, or it just happens because of time, and it's not intentional. So you know, as a customer, you should be a little bit forgiving about that. But as a vendor, you shouldn't forgive yourself a whole lot. You know, you need to keep your stuff updated. And so as things change, you also need to change. And so keeping all the rest of that in mind, update your code base for reals. All right. So with that being said, this is all to say this. You know, a lot of times this has been, you know, people do nothing, right? Whether we're talking about, you know, a vendor who says I can't do this, or a vendor who says I can't prioritize this, or and that's open source or commercial, or we're talking about a customer who says I'm not going to report this, or we're talking about a developer who says I'm not going to help and fix this. We're in an open source ecosystem. We are all responsible for the perception of what DNN is. We are responsible for how many people show up to any given event. Every single one of us, we're responsible for how many people show up to these user group meetings. We should be kicking people away from the GoToMeeting because there's not enough slots. This is responsibility for every single person that's part of the DNN community. We can't do nothing because at the end of the day, that creates a perception that the platform sucks, and when the platform sucks, people leave. And when people leave, we have a smaller group of people, and when we have a smaller group of people, we have nobody to sell our services or our products to. So this is really a call out to you guys, like, this is great having information, but we need more of it. We need more people creating it. We need more people reporting it and helping with it, and we need more vendors reacting to it, and also raising their prices. So to that end, thank you, and any final questions?
Well, that was an excellent walkthrough, and I think that just, of course, the people here and being able to see folks in the room, there were notes taken and nods of appreciation and interest at each of the different parts, whether we were at first talking about themes and skins or into modules or back again. This is all good info, and you know, here with us in the group, bringing it home here at the end about being involved and everyone being sure to participate and change these issues or change these things because they make a difference in perception and with the community is a strong message to bring home to everybody. Clint and David, you guys participating in the chat, were there any other questions that either weren't addressed kind of at the time? I think we hit everything.
No, I didn't see any.
Will, you're going to have this slide deck available that we can help post back online? Are you going to post it in as a blog?
Yeah, I'm going to post it. I'll probably post it on my own blog as well, maybe. But I'm going to add another slide here right before the thank you that has some resources on here. Many of the things that we that we discussed during the presentation. And as soon as I get that slide done, which I hope to be tonight, but worst case scenario tomorrow. As soon as I get that done, I'll give you guys the links or attachments or whatever to the slide deck.
We'll have our video post and notes with those same links up on the Southern Fried website, but would love to share all those resources and copy that information and link over to you.
Cool. Well, thank you guys for having me. Any questions?
No, I think that we asked questions as we went along or nodded vigorously and enthusiastically when you hit each point. Thank you very much, Will, for this fantastic presentation. And again, topical information for what to look for, how to look for it, and even more importantly, some of the tools that can help make it easier to test and diagnose. Everything from your themes and modules all the way down to your server performance. That was an excellent kind of all bases covered formula for helping improve your sites and keeping them clean, and that's exactly what you promised us at the top of the billing. So thank you very much, Will, for being with us tonight.
Well, enjoy your beer time.
All right. Well, unless we have any other specific announcements or items, I think we'll be able to call a close for our meeting tonight. Yeah, everybody's off or everyone's won, so we'll pause for tonight.
Not won the Jeff Brains lesson.
Yeah, does anyone need to win again? Folks watching this online or as in recaps later on, be sure to pay attention. If you catch us live and you catch us on the night of an event, we have giveaways, and that's open to the folks who join us on the night of the event. So if you've watched and you'd like to pick up something free, stop by our next session or two, and we'd love to see you. Speaking of which, our next session is going to be on November the 17th. That is, again, the third Thursday of November, and we may have a special guest with us. I don't remember if he's going to be in person yet or if this is not going to be in person. We will have a special guest in person. Should we mention or should we not mention yet? All right, we'll confirm. But that is our next session coming up, and we will have some more updates and some more information specifically on DNN Summit. If we can get maybe one of the folks, Cassidy or someone, to join us officially and give us some more updates, because that will be our last official meeting online before we actually see everybody at DNN Summit. Just to mention, the idea we've kicked around is that we might actually host our DNN Summit, our Southern Fried DNN meeting from DNN Summit that night, since it's going to be one of the nights of the summit. So we'll talk about that and bat it around a little bit more. Thanks very much to everyone joining us online. Thanks again to Will, and we will see you in November, everyone. Thank you.